I know what you're thinking. Voodoo? Really? But when I found pins stuck into a cloth figure with my initials on it, buried under the azalea bush near my porch, I didn't laugh. I didn't scream. I didn't even blink. I just smiled. Because once upon a time, long before I was just a grandma with knitting needles, I was the most sought-after medium in 3 counties. People used to drive from 6 states to sit in my kitchen. I could read a room without cards, clear a house without sage, and once, though I never told anyone this, I reversed a curse by boiling rose stems in rainwater under the harvest moon. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on my daughter-in-law, make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching this from. This story gets weirder than you think. It started on a Thursday, 2 weeks after my son David and his wife Melinda moved in next door. David's always been kind, loyal to a fault, but Melinda? From the moment he brought her home, something about her energy made my skin itch. Polished, polite, and pretty in that sharp-edged way, her smiles never reached her eyes. When they bought the old Jenkins property, a fixer-upper ranch just 2 lots over, I didn't protest. I even baked them a peach cobbler and helped unpack boxes. But within days, I felt off. My plants started dying, all of them, even the rosemary. My dreams turned strange, full of shadows and scratching sounds. And then came the accidents. I slipped on my porch, spilled hot tea on my lap, locked myself out 3 times in 1 week. Nothing huge, just odd, like someone was tugging at the seams of my life. And then, that morning, I was deadheading my azaleas when my hand brushed something strange in the soil. I pushed aside the mulch, and there it was, a cloth figure, crude and stitched with red thread. The eyes were 2 black buttons. It wore a scrap of my favorite blue cardigan, the one I thought I'd lost last week. There were pins in the head, the knee, and the chest. Now, most people would panic, but I just stood there, squinting at it in the sunlight, like I was examining a rotten tomato. "Oh, honey," I whispered, "you picked the wrong old lady." Let me tell you something about Melinda. She thinks I'm soft. That's her first mistake. She thinks because I make elderberry syrup in mason jars and sing hymns while I clean, I don't see her. But I do. I saw her eyeing David's insurance folder when he forgot it on the counter. I saw her flinch when I mentioned the trust fund his father left him. And I felt the pull the day I found the doll, like a hook in the center of my chest. Someone had been trying to send misery my way. The old ways, the dark ways. But I'm not a novice. I brought the doll inside, set it on a white cloth, and lit a single candle. Then I whispered, not a spell, not a curse, a mirror. In our world, there's a saying, never throw darkness at a mirror. It comes back twice as strong. I didn't do a thing to her. I simply let her own intentions reflect back. By sunset, the wind picked up. My headache vanished. I slept like a rock for the first time in days. But the next morning, I saw Melinda limping out of her front door with a brace on her knee. In New Chapter, I'll tell you what happened when Melinda's world started to unravel and how the smallest coincidences drove her to my doorstep, eyes wide with fear. You'll never guess what she begged me to do next. Melinda's limp wasn't the only change. By the second day, I noticed her hair was pinned up messily, nothing like her usual sleek ponytail. The air around their house felt unsettled. Their garbage cans were knocked over, their porch light flickered all night, and twice I saw delivery men come and leave with no one answering the door. On the 3rd morning, I watched her struggle to lift a bag of potting soil into her trunk, only to spill it across the driveway and drop the rest on her own foot. Call it coincidence if you want, but I knew better. I'd seen it before, that domino effect. When someone dips into old magic without respect, it rebounds. Energy, especially dark energy, needs a home. If it can't find you, it finds its way back. David came over that afternoon. His eyes looked tired, and his voice was a little too light, too careful. "Mom," he said, "Melinda's having a rough week. Some kind of flu or something. She's not sleeping well." I didn't say anything, just handed him a jar of homemade broth and said, "Maybe it's the air around her." He blinked. "The air?" "Mm-hmm. Sometimes what we breathe in depends on what we breathe out." He didn't ask questions. But later that night, while I sat by the window sipping mint tea, I saw their bedroom light blink rapidly, then go out entirely. For the next hour, the house stayed dark. No sound, no motion. And then, the scream. It wasn't a long scream, just one short, high-pitched burst like someone was shocked, not by pain, but by something seen. I didn't move. I didn't call. I simply waited. And sure enough, the next morning, she came. She knocked on my back door, not the front, mind you, where neighbors might see, wearing oversized sunglasses and a too-thin cardigan. Her hair was tangled, one of her earrings was missing. I opened the door. "Morning, Melinda." She didn't say anything at first, just stood there like a statue. "Want to come in?" She gave the tiniest nod. I stepped aside and watched her tiptoe over the threshold like she expected the floor to fall out from under her. She sat at my kitchen table, wringing her hands. I could feel the tension coming off her like steam from a kettle. She swallowed, "I think someone cursed me." I tilted my head. "Really?" She nodded quickly. "I've had nightmares. The electricity's acting weird. My phone keeps calling numbers I didn't dial. I found a snake in the laundry room." Now that one almost made me laugh. Spirit has a sense of humor sometimes. I leaned in slightly. "And what makes you think it's a curse?" She hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the kitchen window. "Because I tried something I shouldn't have." There it was, the confession dancing just behind her teeth. But she didn't say the word. She didn't say doll or pins or azaleas. She didn't have to. I stood and poured her some lemon balm tea, set it in front of her, let the silence do the work. She stared at the steam like it held the answer to everything. "I think I messed up," she whispered. I sat back down. "You know, Melinda, there's an old belief that what you send out returns to you, triple, sometimes more." She went very still. "And it's not just about intent," I continued softly. "It's about energy. Desperation has a scent. The universe picks it up, and if you're not grounded, it pulls you under." Her eyes welled up. "I didn't mean—" "You didn't think you'd get caught." She looked away. I let a beat pass, then said, "Do you know what I used to do?" She shook her head. "I used to help people with problems they couldn't explain. Whispers in the walls, shadows on their chest at night, cattle that wouldn't eat, babies who cried when they crossed certain thresholds." She looked up. "I used to be the person people feared and trusted in the same breath, because I didn't just read energy, I redirected it." She was silent for a long moment. Then, in a whisper, "Can you undo it?" I leaned forward. "Undo what?" Her voice broke. "Whatever's happening to me, please, I'm scared." I sipped my tea. Let the warmth fill the silence. Then I said, "You have to return what you took. That's how balance works." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "You made something you filled with intent and malice. You buried it in my soil. You need to dig it up. And you need to apologize, not with words, with action." That night, just before sundown, I watched from my window as Melinda knelt by my azaleas with a small trowel. Her fingers shook. She looked over her shoulder twice, but never saw me. She found the doll, pulled it from the dirt like it burned her. Then she did something I didn't expect. She hugged it, pressed it to her chest like a child clutching a stuffed animal. And then she cried. Real, shaking, ugly tears. I didn't interrupt. I just watched, then turned away. Some lessons I've learned need to be felt through the fingertips. In New Chapter, I'll share how David found out everything and what he did when he realized who his wife really was and who his mother had always been. His reaction still makes me wonder. The next morning, I was up before dawn. There's something about the stillness of early hours, before the birds start, before the cars pass, that makes the air feel honest. I sat on my back porch with a mug of cinnamon coffee, watching a squirrel dig through my potted lavender. Peaceful, balanced, until I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel walkway. It was David. His silhouette was stiff, his walk slower than usual, and in his hand, he held the doll, the voodoo doll, wrapped in a towel like something fragile or infected. He didn't say a word until he was standing in front of me. "Mom," he said, his voice gravelly, "can I sit?" I nodded and motioned to the chair beside me. He placed the towel, with the doll, gently on the table like it might bite him. Then he looked at me with eyes I hadn't seen since he was 10 and broke the neighbor's window. But this time, he wasn't scared of punishment. He was scared of truth. "I found this in Melinda's nightstand," he said. I stayed quiet. "She told me," his throat tightened, "she told me what she did." Still, I said nothing. He stared at me like he was searching for something in my expression. "You knew, didn't you?" "I knew," I said softly. "How long?" "Since the moment my azaleas died." He exhaled like someone deflating, rubbed the back of his neck. "She said it was a joke at first. Then she said it was desperation. Then she said she thought it wouldn't work." "That's the problem," I said. "People always think magic is either fake or foolproof. They forget it's alive." David looked at the doll again. It wasn't just a crude thing of string and cloth anymore. It looked wrong. The yarn was graying, the fabric slightly charred at the edges, like it had aged or been used. "She said she wanted the inheritance," he admitted, barely above a whisper. My heart clenched, even though I already knew. "She thought if she could make you weak, that maybe you'd step down from everything, that I'd get control of the trust, the house, everything." I didn't speak, didn't need to. "She said she didn't want to hurt you. She just wanted you out of the way." There it was, the raw truth. I sipped my coffee. "And what do you want, David?" He looked at me like I'd struck him. "I never asked you to choose," I said, "but you married her. You made a home with her. And now you see what she's capable of." He hung his head. I didn't know, I swear. I reached out and gently pushed the towel-covered doll closer to him. "Then it's your turn," I said. "You do the next part." He frowned. "What part?" "You return it. You cleanse it. You make the decision about where this energy goes next." He looked at me confused. "You mean burn it? Bury it?" I met his eyes. "That's not for me to say." He sat there in silence for a long time. And then, like he was in a trance, he stood, took the doll, and walked toward the old fire pit behind the house. I didn't follow. Whatever he did out there, it was between him and the consequences of love. That evening, there was a knock at my front door. It was Sarah. Tears on her cheeks, no makeup, hair pulled back into a messy bun. She looked more like a lost teenager than a grown woman. "May I come in?" she asked. I didn't answer, just stepped aside. She sat at my kitchen table in the same chair Melinda had used a few days earlier. "I know everything," she said. "David told me." Her voice cracked. "And I just wanted to say I'm sorry for doubting you, for all the times I looked down on you." I raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to forgive me," she said quickly. I just needed to tell you that I see now what you protected us from, what you've always protected us from." I stared at her for a moment, then said, "It wasn't about protection. It was about balance. You can't erase chaos, Sarah, but you can choose where it lands." She wiped her eyes. "Melinda's not coming back, is she?" I didn't answer. Some things don't need confirmation. I want to help, she said suddenly, with the house, the trust, the family things. I want to do it the right way this time, not with secrets, not with ambition. I looked at her closely, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a woman growing into her integrity. Later that night, I sat by the fireplace and opened the oldest box in my attic. Inside were letters, trinkets, dried herbs, and a small bundle wrapped in silk, the last doll I'd ever made, decades ago. I held it for a while, then whispered to it, "Looks like I still remember who I am." And I smiled, because power kept in silence is still power, but power wielded in wisdom, that's legacy. In New Chapter, I'll show you what happened when the town learned about the story, and how a woman once feared for being strange became something very different. You won't believe how they looked at me after what happened at the church fair.
2 days passed without a word from Melinda. I didn't need to see her to know what she was feeling. Shame, confusion, maybe even fear. That's the thing about energy. When it boomerangs back, it doesn't knock politely. But what I didn't expect was what came next. It was a quiet Wednesday morning. I was trimming my roses when I heard the distinct creak of my gate. When I turned around, Melinda was there. On her knees, in the dirt, tears running down her face, eyeliner smudged, hair in tangles. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "I can't take it anymore," she whispered, voice hoarse. I set my shears down, not saying a word. She crawled closer, then looked up at me like a child begging a mother for mercy. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought maybe if you'd move on, David would finally have what he deserved. I was desperate. I was stupid." I let the silence sit. Then I said, "Desperation doesn't excuse manipulation." Her shoulders shook. I know that now. Everything I wished on you, it's happening to me. My skin burns for no reason. The mirror in our bedroom shattered. I got 3 flat tires in 2 days. And yesterday, David found a dead bird in our hallway. She choked on a sob. "Please, make it stop. I'll do anything." I looked at her for a long moment, then said, "It wasn't me." She blinked. "What?" "I never reversed it," I said. "I didn't need to." She paled. "Because what you created fed on your own intention. You tied your spirit to that doll. You poured your will into it. It didn't need my hand. It only needed yours." She covered her face with both hands, gasping for breath. "I want to undo it," she said. "Tell me how." I led her into the house. No candles, no incense, just the old wooden table where so many decisions had been made over the years. I pulled out a glass bowl and placed it in front of her. "Write down everything you did, every thought, every wish you made while holding that doll. Be honest. If you lie, it won't work." She hesitated. "With what?" I handed her a pen and a sheet of paper. "Start." She did, slowly, haltingly at first. Then the words came in a rush. I watched as her face twisted with shame, horror, regret. When she was done, she handed it to me. I didn't read it. I just lit a match. The paper caught flame instantly. She flinched as it curled, blackened, and vanished into ash. Then I poured salt into the bowl, added a sprig of sage, and stirred it with the end of the burnt match. "You'll take this," I said. "You'll bury it where no one walks. You'll say nothing. You'll carry the weight of your choices without turning it into theater." She nodded. "And you'll never, ever touch magic again." Tears still on her cheeks, she whispered, "I swear." I believed her, because now she knew what it felt like. That evening, David came by. He hugged me tighter than he had in years. "Whatever you did," he said, "thank you." I didn't correct him. Some things are better left mysterious. He sat on the porch with me for a while, watching the sun go down. "She's changed," he said. "I don't know what happened in that house, but she came home different, scared, but lighter somehow." "She faced herself," I said. He looked at me. "Are you okay?" I smiled. "David, I've been through more than you know. This isn't the first time someone tried to cross me." He chuckled softly. "I'm starting to realize that." We sat in companionable silence. And then he reached into his pocket and handed me a small wrapped box. I opened it. Inside was a delicate silver pin, shaped like a crescent moon. "I saw it at a little antique shop," he said. "Reminded me of you, of how you always watched over everything, even when I didn't see it." I blinked away tears. Sometimes the smallest gifts hold the heaviest meaning. The next weekend, I went to the town church fair. People who once looked through me now greeted me warmly. I saw Sarah helping with the bake sale, and she called me over like I was family. I stood there, sunlight in my hair, the moon pin on my jacket, and realized something I hadn't in a long time. They saw me now. Not just as David's mom, not just as the odd woman with herbs, but as someone who had lived, endured, and still stood tall. Melinda never made another doll again, but I kept the ashes of hers sealed in a glass jar on my mantel, not as a threat, as a reminder that even in silence, power remains. The next chapter, I'll tell you what happened when my past as a medium came back into the spotlight, and why I was invited to speak at the most unexpected place in town. What they asked me to do next, I never thought I'd say yes to.
They say you can bury your past, but if it has roots, it'll grow back. That week, word got around town. I don't know who told whom, but people started looking at me differently again. This time, not with suspicion, but with something between curiosity and reverence. It started subtly. A cashier at the grocery store asked if I knew anything about spiritual cleansing. My neighbor Mary, who hadn't spoken more than 3 words to me in years, left a jar of homemade jam on my porch with a note. "For strength, you radiate it." And then came the letter. It was written on thick cream stationery, the kind that smelled faintly of rose water in importance. I opened it at the kitchen table, cup of tea still steaming beside me. "Dear Miss Eleanor Thomas," it read, "we would be honored if you'd join us for our annual Women's Circle gathering this Sunday. Your journey, both past and present, has deeply inspired our members. We believe your voice could help others find their own. We respectfully invite you to speak." I reread it 3 times before setting it down. The Women's Circle. They were the town's quiet backbone, retired teachers, counselors, small business owners, women who'd weathered life's storms and helped others do the same. They weren't flashy, but they noticed everything. I hadn't been invited to one of their meetings in over 20 years. Not since I stopped doing readings. Not since I tried to become just mom. I thought about declining. What would I say? How could I speak of magic without sounding like I was selling snake oil? How could I mention Melinda's little experiment without dragging my family's name through the mud? But something in me stirred, something I hadn't felt in a long time. That old flicker of power. Not the kind that bends spoons or calls down lightning, the kind that comes from truth, from experience, from walking through fire and not hiding the burns. So I said yes. Sunday came with golden sunlight and birdsong. I wore a soft lavender blouse, my silver crescent pin gleaming at the collar. I braided my hair back like I used to, not for vanity, but for focus. When I caught my reflection, I didn't see just Mom. I saw Eleanor. The gathering was held in the old community center. I arrived early, heart tapping fast, palms cool but steady. Inside, the room smelled of brewed herbs and beeswax candles. Chairs were arranged in a welcoming half circle. There were maybe 15 women, all seated and chatting softly until they noticed me. And then, quiet. But not the cold kind, the respectful kind. "Eleanor," said Ruth Haywood, a retired midwife with eyes sharp as pins and a heart twice the size. "We're so glad you came." I sat down slowly, letting the silence settle. Then I began. "I was 12, I said. The first time I felt it, that knowing. I didn't understand it then, just thought I was strange." There were nods. "But over time, I stopped being afraid of it. I learned how to listen, how to help." I didn't go into details, no rituals, no chants, just moments. Moments like feeling someone's sorrow before they spoke it, or waking in the night knowing a neighbor needed help, and showing up before they called. "I never charged a dime," I said, "but people brought bread, candles, sometimes just their thanks. That was enough." I paused. Then I became a mother, and I thought, maybe it's time to stop, time to be normal. I packed away the tarot cards, hid the oils. I told myself the world didn't need that version of me anymore. I looked around the room. But the truth is, we never lose who we are. We just quiet it down to make others comfortable. Soft gasps, murmured yeses. And sometimes that silence turns into a sickness. I saw tears in a few eyes. I had to remember who I was, not for show, not for revenge, but for clarity, for survival. And once I did, the world remembered me too. There was a long silence when I finished. Then Ruth stood and said, "We'd like you to lead next month's circle." I blinked. "Me?" She smiled. "It's time." That night, I sat on my porch under a waxing moon, the breeze light on my face. I wasn't angry at Melinda anymore. If anything, I was grateful. Her little stunt was reckless, yes, dangerous even, but it also lit a match in a dark room I'd sealed off long ago. And now that room was full of light. In New Chapter, I'll tell you what happened when Melinda made one final mistake, and how I handled it without lifting a single finger.
It was the Thursday after the women's circle. The air felt different, like a storm had passed, but the sky wasn't done rumbling. I was in the garden, my hands deep in the soil, when I heard it. The sound of someone trying to be quiet and failing miserably. Shoes crunching over gravel, breath held too loud. A figure lurking behind my hydrangeas like a child who thought shadows could make her invisible. Melinda. She wore a cream sweater, probably cashmere, and large sunglasses, despite the cloud cover. She clutched something in both hands, wrapped in a silk scarf. "Melinda," I said without looking up, "why are you sneaking through my side yard like a raccoon?" She froze. I didn't want to disturb you," she stammered. "You disturbed my hydrangeas." She stepped forward hesitantly and held out the scarf bundle. "I came to return this," she said, unwrapping it slowly. It was the doll. The same one I'd found before, only now it was bound in a red ribbon, with dried lavender tucked inside the cloth and a handwritten note attached. "I'm sorry. Please undo it." I stood and brushed the dirt from my gloves. "I told you to destroy it," I said, keeping my voice even. "I tried," she blurted. "I burned the first one, but I made another one. I thought maybe if I fixed it, if I made it nicer, you'd forgive me, or at least make it stop." I looked at her closely. Her eyes were puffy, her lips cracked, her hands trembled as she held the doll out like it might bite her. "I haven't slept in 5 days," she whispered. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear your voice in my dreams, or I see fire, or my phone rings and no one's there.
It's like I'm being followed by a shadow I can't shake off. Melinda, I said calmly, that's not me doing that. She blinked rapidly. It's not? No, that's you. That's what happens when you play with things you don't understand. The fear isn't from me, it's from inside you. I just stopped shielding you from it. She sat down on the low stone wall like her knees gave out. I thought you were just a sweet old lady who liked crossword puzzles, she said. I am, I replied, but I also carry a lineage older than both of us put together. She shook her head, rubbing her temples. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just scared. I thought, if David didn't get his inheritance soon, we'd be stuck. I panicked. We're drowning in debt. And you always seem so calm, so in control. And I just wanted control too, I finished for her. She nodded, her eyes filled with tears again, this time without panic, just shame. I walked over, took the doll gently from her hands, and unwrapped it fully. Its stitching was neater this time. There was care in the way it had been sewn, but it still pulsed with something crooked. I held it in my palms, closed my eyes, and whispered 4 words in a language she didn't understand. Then I dropped it into the compost bin beside me. Melinda gasped, "Aren't you supposed to burn it?" I smiled. No, sometimes the best way to end something is to let it rot. She stayed for tea. We didn't talk about curses or inheritance or David. Instead, she asked me about the herbs on my windowsill and what chamomile was good for. When she left, I watched her walk back to her car slowly, shoulders slumped in a way that looked more human than defeated. Something had changed in her. Not everything, but enough. That night, David called. "Mom," he said quietly, "Sarah told me you and Melinda talked today. She hasn't cried once since she got home." "That's good," I replied. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." He paused. "Did you really, do something to her?" I thought about that for a long moment. "No," I said, "I didn't have to." It's funny how people think power means lightning bolts and chanting in moonlight. Real power is knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, when to burn something and when to bury it in compost and let the earth do the work. I didn't curse her. I let her feel the weight of what she tried to do, and she lifted it herself. That's stronger than any spell I could ever cast. I let her share what happened next between me and David, and the surprising thing he told me about his childhood that changed everything. The following Sunday, David came by without calling first. It was early, the kind of early when the air is still cool and coffee tastes stronger than usual. I was out back tending to my herbs when I heard the front door creak open and shut again. I didn't flinch. "Mom?" His voice called out tentatively. "In the garden," I said. He stepped outside, hands deep in his hoodie pockets, eyes scanning the yard like he hadn't seen it in years, which, honestly, he hadn't, not like this. He sat down across from me at the patio table without saying anything for a while. I didn't press him. Finally, he exhaled hard. "She told me everything." I simply nodded. "I can't believe it," he continued. "I mean, I can. That's the worst part. I can believe it." "She was scared," I said. "Scared people do stupid things." "She almost cost me you," he said, louder than he intended. The stillness that followed was loud in itself. "I never should have let her talk me into cutting you off financially," he muttered, eyes fixed on the table. "I thought you were holding back out of pride, not anything real. I didn't know you had reasons." I placed my hand on his, firm but warm. "I wasn't angry at you, David. I was disappointed, but I never stopped loving you, not for a second." He choked back something, a laugh or a sob, I couldn't tell, and looked away. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a faded photograph. "You remember this?" he asked. I took it gently. It was the three of us, me, him, and my late husband, at the county fair years ago. David must have been 6. He had ice cream on his nose, and my husband had a sunburn and the goofiest grin. I had my arm wrapped around both of them like I was anchoring the whole world. "That was the day Dad won you that ridiculous stuffed bear," David smiled faintly. "You wouldn't let it ride in the trunk." "Because it was bigger than you," I chuckled, "and you named it Mayor Buttons." "I forgot about that," he laughed, genuinely this time. Then his expression turned serious again. "I've been thinking a lot about back then," he said, "and I wanted to ask you something I never had the guts to before." "Go on." He hesitated. "Was Dad really as good as I remember him?" I set the photo down carefully. "He was good to you," I said. "He adored you, but he struggled with things I didn't want you to see." David nodded slowly. "I remember hearing you cry once. I was maybe 7. I didn't know what it meant then, but I do now." There was no need to explain. Some truths don't need spelling out. "I think part of me kept waiting for you to fall apart the way he did," David admitted. "When you didn't, I thought it meant you didn't feel as much, but now I realize you just carried it better." "I had to," I said. "You were watching." We sat in silence again, only this time it felt healing, like stitching fabric instead of tearing it. Then, as if working up to it, he asked, "Can I come to dinner next Sunday? Just me, no drama, no Melinda." "Of course," I said. "You never needed an invitation." He smiled, softer than I'd seen in years. "Maybe I'll bring dessert." Later that afternoon, I found myself in my study, staring at a wooden box I hadn't touched in years. It was a gift from my grandmother, a woman with wild white hair and a knowing gaze that could freeze grown men mid-sentence. Inside were little pieces of who I used to be before I chose motherhood over mysticism. Crystals worn smooth by time, faded tarot cards with edges kissed by ash, and one dried rose wrapped in cloth, the first spell I ever cast. I picked up the rose and held it close. "You'd be proud of me, Nana," I whispered. I hadn't needed to hex anyone. I trusted the truth to do the work, and it had. And now, my son was finding his way back. In New Chapter, I'll tell you what happened when David came for that Sunday dinner, and why Melinda showed up too, uninvited. What she said at the table shocked even me. Sunday evening came draped in a golden glow. I set the table like I used to, nothing fancy but thoughtful. Cloth napkins, my good casserole dish, the candle holder David made in 8th grade that still leaned a little to the left. At 5:58 p.m. sharp, I heard a car pull up. I opened the door expecting to see David alone, maybe holding that promised dessert. But there she was, Melinda. She stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes glassy, whether from emotion or something stronger, I couldn't yet tell. "Mom," David said carefully, "Melinda asked to come." I looked at him, then at her. Her lips were tight, her posture stiff, but under it all, I saw something I hadn't expected. Fear. Not of me, no. Of what she might have done. Of what she was becoming. I stepped aside. "Dinner's getting cold," I said. They followed me in. The table was quiet for a while. Forks moved, casserole was served. David complimented the seasoning, a peace offering in the form of words. Melinda barely touched her plate. Finally, she cleared her throat. "I owe you an apology," she said. I looked up, meeting her eyes. She blinked quickly, then continued. "I was stupid and mean and petty, and I let envy turn me into someone I didn't recognize. I thought if I could shift things, make your life harder, maybe I'd come out on top somehow. Maybe David would—" "Mel," David warned gently. "No," she said, "let me finish." She turned to me again. "I found the photo album, the clippings, the letters, everything from before. I laughed at first, thought it was silly. Then strange things started happening. And I don't mean coincidences. I mean things I couldn't explain. Her hands trembled. My hairbrush catching fire. 3 flat tires in 2 days. My engagement ring disappearing and reappearing in the fridge. The fridge. David looked stunned. You never told me any of that. I didn't want to. I didn't want to admit it was happening. But the worst thing, she continued, wasn't the weird stuff. It was how everything I said about you started happening to me. If I called you bitter, I woke up the next day too depressed to move. When I called you manipulative, David started pulling away from me. I thought I was losing my mind. She wiped her eyes and laughed bitterly. I didn't believe in anything, not energy, not karma, not any of it, until I felt it reflect back on me like a slap. I leaned forward, calm. You thought I put a curse on you, I said. She nodded slowly. And now? I asked. I think maybe I cursed myself. That was the closest thing to insight I'd ever seen from her. I don't expect forgiveness, she whispered, but I wanted you to know I'm done playing games. There was silence. Then David looked at me, not with pressure, not with pleading, just openness, a son letting his mother decide. I took a deep breath. You know what I believe, Melinda? I said. I believe the world gives back what we put in. That goes for prayers and poison alike. She nodded, tears falling now. I reached across the table, slowly, and placed my hand over hers. Consider the scales balanced, I said. Whatever shadow you stirred has already passed through. Let's not wake it again. We didn't hug. That wasn't us. But when she left that night, she said, "Thank you." And she meant it. David stayed back to help clean up. We worked in quiet harmony, scraping plates, rinsing dishes, stacking leftovers. Before he left, he paused in the doorway. You know, he said, I always thought I had to protect her from you. Now I see you were protecting me. I smiled softly. No, honey, I was protecting us all. Next chapter, I'll tell you what Melinda did next that even I didn't see coming, and how, in the most unexpected way, she helped me heal something I thought was long buried. A few days had passed since the dinner. Something had shifted. The air around the house felt clearer, lighter, as if some old draft had finally found its way out the door. I resumed my morning routines. Tea at sunrise, trimming my gardenias, brushing the dust off photo frames I hadn't looked at in months. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the next call, the next slight, the next bitter little game. But then Melinda called me. Could I stop by? She asked, alone. I'll admit it, I hesitated. The last time she showed up solo, she was dropping off a dish for a potluck she never intended to attend, just to make a point that her casserole had been requested, not mine. But her voice this time was different. So I said yes. She arrived mid-afternoon. No makeup, no jewelry, not even her wedding ring. She carried a paper bag and something else I couldn't quite place. Maybe humility, maybe anxiety, maybe both. We sat at the table, and she took a long breath. I want to show you something. From the bag, she pulled out a small box, hand-carved, dark wood, maybe cedar. It looked old. Inside was the doll, the Voodoo doll, at least her attempt at one. It was crude, buttons for eyes, a scrap of one of my old scarves sewn around the middle. She had taken a marker and drawn my name on the back. I raised an eyebrow. You kept it? She nodded sheepishly. I thought I'd get rid of it, burn it, bury it, but I didn't. I couldn't, because that would mean pretending it didn't happen, and I need to remember who I was when I made it, and how far I have to go from here. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She kept going. I don't know what you used to do, in full. I've only read bits and seen hints, but I know this. You didn't deserve what I did, and that doll, it didn't work on you. It worked on me. Every day I poured bitterness into it, it poured it back. She looked up. I came here to ask you how to let go of that. That was the moment I knew she was really changing, because only someone who had started to learn could admit they had no idea how to heal. You sure you want my advice? I asked. It might involve incense and uncomfortable questions. She laughed, a real, unfiltered laugh. I'm ready. So I got up, walked to my bookshelf, and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside were 2 smooth river stones I had used back in my meditation practice years ago. Nothing magical, just grounding. I placed them in her hands. Hold them, I said, and sit with this one question. What was I afraid of when I did that? She furrowed her brow, but obeyed. I thought you'd hex me, she joked nervously. I smiled. I don't do hexes. I do mirrors. She looked down at the stones. Her eyes watered again. I was afraid you'd never see me as enough, that David would always love you more, that you were the heart of this family, and I was just decoration. The truth hit the table like a dropped glass. But you are part of the heart, I said softly. You just didn't believe you had a place at the table. We sat like that for a while. No more questions, no more stories. Just a daughter-in-law and her mother-in-law grieving a war that neither really won. Before she left, she placed the doll back in the box and said, I want to bury this in your garden. Is that okay? I nodded. We walked outside together, and I showed her a quiet corner under the lilac tree. The earth was soft, the breeze gentle. She dug a small hole with her bare hands and placed the doll inside. When she stood up, I saw her differently, not as the girl who tried to replace me or rival me, but as a woman struggling, like the rest of us, to matter and belong. Later that night, I lit a candle. Not for ceremony, not for ritual, just for peace.
The next morning, there was a knock on my door. I assumed it was the mailman or maybe one of the neighbors returning a casserole dish. I wasn't expecting what I found when I opened it. Melinda, again. But this time, she was holding something different. A bundle wrapped in soft blue linen tied with a white ribbon. Her hands trembled just slightly as she offered it to me. I made you something, she said quietly. It's not much, but it's from the heart. She handed it to me, and I motioned for her to come inside. We stood in the kitchen, the morning light filtering through the blinds, warming the tile floor. I unwrapped it slowly, like a gift, which it was. Inside, a hand-sewn memory book. The cover was cloth, stitched with little designs, stars, leaves, and a small heart. Inside were printed photos of David, Melinda, and even a few I hadn't seen in years, of me, of my late husband, of us as a family, before it all got so complicated. And next to each picture, she had written something in pen, a memory, a note, a feeling. I wanted to remind us both, she said, of where we come from, and maybe where we can go from here. I ran my fingers over the pages. In one, there was a picture of David at age 10 holding up a crooked birthday cake we had made together. Underneath, she wrote, "He still talks about this cake. You gave him memories I can never compete with, and I don't have to. I just want to add to them." On another page, a candid photo of me sitting in the garden, laughing, dirt on my gloves. This is how David describes you when he's proud. Calm, wise, a little wild. I want to see that too. There were tears in my eyes before I even made it halfway through. She wasn't just saying sorry. She was rebuilding something, piece by piece.
I know it doesn't fix everything, she said, her voice unsteady, but I don't want to be the woman who made a voodoo doll anymore. I want to be someone David's proud of, someone you trust again. I sat down at the table and motioned for her to do the same. You don't have to become someone new, I said. You just have to be willing to let go of who you thought you had to be. She nodded. There was silence, but not the kind that lingers awkwardly, the kind that feels like rest, healing. Later that afternoon, David stopped by. He looked surprised to see Melinda already there, not because she was visiting me, but because she looked relaxed, peaceful even. We all sat down, and he said, I don't know what happened this week, but something's different. You're different. Melinda smiled gently and reached for his hand. I had help. He turned to me with that sheepish grin I'd known since he was a boy. You did something, didn't you? I laughed softly. Let's just say the wind shifted. He looked between us, his mother and his wife, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in a while. Relief, hope, maybe even pride. That night, after they left, I sat with the memory book again. Page by page, it felt like a thread stitching through time, pulling together all the frayed pieces of love, regret, misunderstanding, and grace. One page near the end had a photo I hadn't expected. It was of me holding David as a baby. I looked exhausted, happy, real. Underneath it, Melinda had written, "You've always protected what mattered. Even when I couldn't see it, you protected us. Thank you for not giving up on me." I closed the book, not to put it away, but to hold it close. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with words or rituals, but with forgiveness offered before it's earned. Thus far, I'll tell you what happened when someone from my past reached out, and why that old part of me, the part I thought I had buried, had one last lesson to teach all of us. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Melinda last stormed out of my house in a whirlwind of resentment, fear, and that cursed doll. Since then, something had shifted. She started stopping by without pretense, no fake errands, no forced conversations, just small, sincere visits. Sometimes she'd bring coffee. Sometimes she'd bring nothing but her silence. And that was okay. David noticed too. He'd called me just the day before and said, I don't know what happened to Mel, but she's calmer, softer. It's like something lifted off her shoulders. I didn't tell him that something had lifted. She had let it go, and so had I. Or so I thought. Because just when I believed the past had finished with me, it came knocking again. Literally. That afternoon, I was watering my chrysanthemums in the backyard when the gate creaked open. I turned, half expecting it to be David, maybe coming to help or to steal a few ripe tomatoes from my garden beds. But it wasn't David. It was Helen, my old friend, my former colleague, and the only other woman in the state who ever came close to rivaling my reputation when I was still an active medium. She looked older, of course, but there was a familiar fire in her gaze, the kind you never forget once you've seen it through candlelight and ritual smoke. "Long time," she said, stepping into the sunlight. I blinked, stunned. "Helen, my God, it has been a long time." She smiled. I heard what happened. I poured us 2 cups of tea, and we sat at the patio table under the shade of my old cherry tree. Helen didn't waste time. She never had. "I know you've been out of practice, Nora, but the energy in your house, in your lineage, it's stirred up." I didn't answer right away. Just let the steam rise from my cup and swirl into the air. "You think I cast something on her?" I finally asked. "On Melinda?" Helen gave a low chuckle. "You? No. But someone like her, with that much envy, fear, and greed, she practically cursed herself just by wanting to." I nodded slowly. I figured as much. She didn't know who she was dealing with. "She still doesn't," Helen said, "but she's not the real concern." I looked up. "Then who is?" Helen reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, thick, worn, and sealed with a symbol I hadn't seen in decades. My heart slowed. "This came to my shop 3 days ago," she said. "No return address, just your name on it." I hesitated. I hadn't been part of the circle in over 15 years. I had buried that life with my husband when the seances ended and my son begged me to just be normal. I chose family over firelight, peace over power. But the envelope sat there, pulsing with old echoes. I opened it. Inside, a photograph. Old, grainy, of me, Helen, and a third woman, Ruth. The 3 of us. Ruth had vanished 10 years ago after a ceremony gone wrong. None of us heard from her again. Until now. "She's back?" I asked, my voice suddenly brittle. Helen nodded. "And she's asking questions. About you? About what happened the last time we were together. About why things turned out the way they did." I leaned back in my chair. The garden felt different now, like the wind had changed direction. "Why now?" I whispered. "Because," Helen said, "someone's opened a door." And I think it started with Melinda's little hobby. It wasn't just a silly voodoo doll, not anymore. Melinda had unknowingly activated something, a thread of intention that stretched back to a time even David didn't know existed. I stood and paced the length of the patio, heart pounding. "What do we do?" I asked. "Do we stop her? Do we warn Ruth?" Helen sipped her tea, then looked up with that same fierce calm she used to wear during storm rituals. "We remember who we are." That night, I pulled the old trunk down from the attic. David had always wondered what was inside, but I never let him see. I told him it was just old costumes from my theater days. Technically, not a lie. I undid the rusted latch and peeled back the velvet cloth. Inside, candles, stones, a set of tarot cards worn to softness, a silver mirror etched with protective runes, and a photograph, a different one, of the 3 of us as young women, smiling with the kind of joy that only comes from shared magic. I hadn't touched any of it in years, but my fingers knew where everything belonged. Part A, when Melinda stumbled upon something she was never meant to see, and what she did that nearly unraveled the protection I spent a lifetime weaving around this family. You're not ready for what happens next.
The trunk sat open on the table, candlelight flickering against its polished silver contents. I hadn't lit these candles in decades, not since David was in high school. And yet, the second I struck the match, it all came rushing back. The rhythm, the power, the memory of who I once was. I didn't need incantations anymore, not really. The energy had always been a part of me, not in the words, but in the intention. And for the first time in years, that intention had a name again. Ruth. I spent the next day preparing quietly. Melinda and David didn't visit, and that suited me fine. I needed stillness. I didn't fear Ruth's return, not exactly, but there was something darker in the air now, something unsettled. And if the past had come back to knock, I needed to be ready to open the door on my own terms. By evening, I lit the final candle in the circle and set the mirror down in front of me. "Show me what stirs," I whispered. At first, nothing, only the reflection of my own weary face. Then, a flicker. The image shifted slightly, like heat rising off pavement. And then, a flash, a face I hadn't seen in 20 years. Ruth. Older, but unmistakable. Her eyes still held that same icy defiance, the kind that could stop a room cold. But something was wrong. Her eyes darted, her lips moved, mouthing something silently in the glass. She wasn't angry. She was afraid. I jolted backward, the chair scraping wood. The candle nearest to the mirror flickered out. For the first time since all this began, I wasn't sure if I was the one being hunted or the one being warned. I wrote Helen a letter that night, told her what I saw, what I felt. And then I did something I swore I'd never do again. I went to the altar. The next day was strangely still. I baked muffins, I read a book, I even watered the tomatoes, but I couldn't shake the mirror's image or Ruth's trembling lips. By mid-afternoon, a knock came at the door. It was Melinda. She looked awful. Her eyes were swollen, skin pale, hair messy, but more than anything, she looked shaken. Not the usual performance, not some woe-is-me routine. She was genuinely rattled. I think something's wrong," she said, barely audible. I stepped aside, let her in. She sank into my kitchen chair like her legs had stopped working. "It's happening again," she whispered, "but worse." I didn't ask what. I didn't need to. "I didn't mean to," she said, tears spilling. "I was angry. I wanted control, but I didn't know what I was opening." Her hands trembled. She reached into her purse and pulled out the doll, now wrapped in a silk scarf, the pins gone. "It started moving," she said. "I swear it moved on its own." I kept my face calm, but inside, my heart kicked once hard. "Where is it now?" I asked. She slid it across the table. I unwrapped it slowly. The stitching along the neck had begun to unravel, not cut, not torn, just loosening. I looked up. "You opened a door, Melinda," I said gently, "one I've spent most of my life keeping sealed. What you did, it echoed further than you realize." "I didn't mean to," she said again. "That doesn't change the result." She covered her face, her shoulders shook. I let her cry. Then I stood and went to the cabinet, pulled out a small bundle of dried herbs, a bowl, and matches. "You're going to help me," I said, "and you're going to listen, because this, all of this, isn't just about me or you. It's older than both of us." She watched as I laid the doll on the table. I lit the herbs. The smoke curled around us, lavender and rue. I began to speak. Not in English, not in words she'd understand, but in language she needed to hear. The language of undoing, of release, of unwinding knots that should never have been tied. For 30 minutes we worked, or rather, I worked. She followed. The air grew thick, almost humming, and when the final match burned out, we sat in silence, hands clasped, heads bowed. And then, stillness. Not emptiness, balance. Melinda looked at me like she'd never seen me before. "Who are you?" she asked. I looked her in the eyes. "I'm the woman who protected your husband when he was just a boy," I said. "The woman who held this family together longer than you've been part of it." I reached out and took her hand. "And I'm the woman who's willing to forgive, if you're willing to change." She nodded, barely breathing. Later that evening, David arrived. He stepped inside, confused by the lingering smoke. "What's going on?" he asked. Melinda whopped to him, and to my surprise, to herself I think, she said, "Your mom just saved me from something I didn't even know I'd let in." He looked at her, then at me, and in that moment, for the first time in years, I saw clarity in his eyes, trust, something whole. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. In New Chapter, you'll find out what happened when Ruth came to town and why everything I thought I'd buried came clawing back to the surface. Believe me, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot.
I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there in the quiet, watching the embers of my fireplace, letting the silence settle into my bones. After everything, the doll, the mirror, the smoke, I should have felt relief. But I didn't. Because deep down, I knew the real storm hadn't even started yet. Melinda had played with something she didn't understand,
But Ruth knew exactly what she was doing. And if the energy I saw in that mirror was right, she was close. Too close. I woke up to a knock, not a gentle knock, pounding. I flung the door open expecting trouble, but what I got was worse. It was Carla, Ruth's niece. We hadn't spoken in nearly a decade, not since Ruth moved out of state. She looked pale, out of breath. "You need to come," she said. "It's Ruth." I grabbed my coat before she even finished the sentence. Ruth lived an hour away now. Small town, big lot, thick trees, high fences, the kind of place you disappear into. As we drove, Carla explained everything. Ruth had been acting strange all week, saying the walls were talking, that someone, or something, was coming through. And last night, she'd locked herself in her study, burned half her herbs, cursed a name Carla didn't recognize. My name. We pulled up just after 9 a.m. I could feel the tension before I stepped inside. The air was heavy, sticky, like honey left in the sun. Her house looked untouched from the outside, but inside, it was chaos. Books off the shelves, candles melted into the floors, and on the wall, a massive sigil, painted in red. My sigil. I found her in the back room, curled up on the floor, clutching a photo of David. She looked like a ghost. "Ruth," I said, careful not to sound like I pitied her. Her head jerked up. She stared at me with bloodshot eyes. "It was you," she whispered. It bounced back. I knelt beside her. "You tried to bind me," I said quietly. "You handed Melinda the tools, knowing she didn't understand what she was unleashing." "I just wanted him to leave you behind," she croaked, "to stop clinging to the past." "Is that what you think I am? A relic?" She didn't answer. I helped her up, took her hand, even though it shook like paper in the wind. "You were better than this once," I told her. "You knew better." Tears rolled down her face. "I didn't think it would work," she said. "Not really, not like this." We stood there for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Make it stop." I didn't promise her anything. I didn't lie and say I could fix everything. But I did help her back into bed. And I did take the sigil off the wall, every stroke reversed in the old language. And when I walked out her door, I felt something lift. Not forgiveness, not yet. But closure? Maybe. I drove home in silence. The roads were empty, the sky pale with late morning light. By the time I pulled into my driveway, David was sitting on the porch. He stood up, rubbing the back of his neck like he used to when he got nervous in school. "I heard about Ruth," he said. "I figured." "She called me." That surprised me. "She said she was sorry." That shocked me. "I think she meant it," he added. We sat side by side on the porch swing, no words for a while, just the creak of old chains and the distant rustle of wind through leaves. Then he said, "I think I knew, deep down, that Melinda was messing with something." I turned to him, surprised by the calm in his voice. "I just didn't want to see it," he said. "Why not?" "Because then I'd have to admit I chose someone who hated you." I reached over, took his hand. "She didn't hate me, David," I said. "She feared me. That's not the same thing." He nodded. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered. "You haven't." That night, I lit one final candle, a white one, for peace. Melinda came by, quietly. No makeup, no act. She didn't say much, just asked if I needed anything. I told her no. But I did tell her she could come in for tea, and she did. She sat across from me, hands folded in her lap. "I don't know what to say," she began. "Then don't," I said. And we just sat like that, not enemies, not quite friends, but trying.
In new chapter, I'll tell you what happened a month later when I received a letter that changed everything, and why the real reason Ruth interfered had nothing to do with David and everything with me. What she'd kept hidden would blow the past wide open. The letter came in a cream envelope, no return address. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Ruth. For someone who'd never been especially sentimental, she had beautiful penmanship, elegant, with flourishes that always felt like a performance. It arrived 1 month after our last encounter. David brought it over himself, fidgeting with it in his hands like it might explode. "She said to give this to you," he mumbled. I opened it in front of him. He stayed seated, silent. "Margaret, I've been thinking about what you said that day, about who we used to be. I don't have much time, but there's something you need to know, something I kept from you, something that might explain why I interfered. Back in '89, there was a gathering. You didn't come. You were grieving your mother, but I went. And that's when I met him. His name was Silas. I thought he was just another charmer, just another man with a strong energy field and a story to tell. But he asked about you. He said you had power you weren't ready for, that if you ever awakened it fully, you'd be dangerous. He said you were tied to something ancient, something that scared even him. I didn't believe him at first, but over the years, little things started to make sense. The mirror, the ash circles, that thing with your voice during the seance in '94. Margaret, I interfered because I thought I was protecting people. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just afraid. I'm sorry. R." I read it twice before saying a word. David waited, anxious. "Who's Silas?" he asked finally. I didn't answer right away. Because I remembered Silas. I'd only met him once, a man in a dark suit with strange eyes. He'd come into my bookstore asking about a specific grimoire I never showed anyone. He smiled like he already knew my secrets. I never saw him again, but I remembered the way my spine went cold the moment he said my name. That letter reopened everything, not just the old wounds, the power, the truth. Ruth hadn't tried to ruin me. She tried to contain me. And now, I wasn't sure who the villain really was anymore. I took the letter upstairs to my attic. It wasn't just storage up there. It was a sanctuary. Candles, herbs, journals that hadn't been touched in decades. A locked wooden box with a black velvet lining. And in the center of it all, my mother's mirror. I hadn't looked into it since the night the ash returned to Melinda, but now I was ready. The mirror pulsed with faint silver light as I lifted the cloth off. I lit 3 candles, traced a familiar sigil in salt around its base, and took a breath. "Show me what Ruth saw," I whispered. The surface shimmered, and then it showed me something that turned my stomach. A flash of me, not now, but younger, standing in the woods, eyes black as pitch, chanting. Then another, Ruth, standing in a circle, crying, as Silas held her hand and pointed towards something I couldn't see. And then him, Silas, staring right into the mirror, into me, like he knew I'd be watching. I warned her, she's stronger than she understands. The candle nearest me flickered violently. And then everything went still. I backed away. This wasn't just energy anymore. This was a door, one I'd locked for decades, and now it was creaking open. I didn't tell David everything, but I did tell him this. I think there's more to my story than you know. He didn't push. He just nodded and said, "Whatever it is, I want to know it, when you're ready." And Melinda? She changed. Not overnight, but enough that when she joined me the next week to sort through old photos, she smiled without looking over her shoulder. She even laughed, Not fake, not bitter, real. She told me she was seeing a therapist, told me she'd burned the doll, that she'd written Ruth a letter, not to defend herself, but to forgive her. I didn't expect that, but I respected it, because if Melinda could let go of that bitterness, maybe there was hope for all of us. And me? I still light a candle every Sunday, not for protection, not anymore, for memory, for power, for clarity. And sometimes I sit by the mirror, not to ask questions, just to watch, because somewhere deep down, I know the story isn't over, not yet. And in New Chapter, I'll tell you about the day I finally faced the truth about Silas and the secret my mother left behind in her final journal. What I found in that attic changed everything I believed about myself, about Ruth, and about what really binds us.
I didn't sleep much after reading Ruth's letter, not because I was afraid, but because the questions wouldn't stop. Who exactly was Silas? What did he know about me? And why did Ruth wait until now, until the end, to tell me? I needed answers, not memories, not symbols, not cryptic visions from a mirror. So I did what I hadn't done in nearly 30 years. I opened my mother's journal. It was buried in the attic, inside a cedar chest with a faded silk ribbon wrapped twice around it. The leather cover was soft with age, and when I opened it, the scent of lavender and something darker, rosemary or myrrh, wafted out. Her handwriting, sharp and slanted, greeted me like a voice from the past. If Margaret ever reads this, it means the mirror has shown her what I feared it would. Silas was not a man, not entirely. He was a watcher, a seer from the old paths, one of the last ones to speak the hidden tongue, and he came looking for you long before you even knew who you were. He told me you would inherit the gift, not just the sight, but the calling. He said your presence would disturb the balance, that your emotions would be too loud, too real, too full of justice to stay hidden. I told him you were just a girl, but he said no, you were fire wrapped in silk. You wouldn't destroy the world, you'd reshape it, with your pain, with your will. He warned me to teach you slowly, to never give you the full mirror, to hide the red key, to delay your awakening until the world was ready. I stopped reading. Tears welled in my eyes. All those years I thought she was holding me back. She was protecting me because she believed in me more than I ever did myself. There were more pages, dozens, some about rituals, some about dreams. One even detailed the day Ruth first came to her for help, long before I knew they were even friends. But the last entry was the one that changed everything. If she chooses to see the mirror again, she must ask it not for what was, but for what will be. And if she is truly ready, it will show her not the end, but the path. So I did. That night, I lit the candles. I placed the red key, now found, nestled in the base of the old wooden box, onto the velvet cloth. And I stood before the mirror. This time, I wasn't afraid. Show me what will be. The mirror shimmered, and then I saw David, smiling. I saw Melinda, whole, radiant, holding a child in her arms. I saw my home, filled with laughter. And then I saw myself, older, wiser, teaching. Not spells, not tricks, not curses, but healing. Women sat in a circle around me, some with tears, some with stories, all with strength. And I was leading them. The vision faded. I exhaled, not because I was overwhelmed, because I finally knew. My story wasn't about Ruth or Melinda or vengeance. It was about power and how you choose to use it. A month later, Melinda invited me to dinner. No hidden motives, no guilt trips, no uncomfortable silences, just a real invitation.
When I arrived, she was wearing an apron, David was setting the table, and music played softly in the background. It was normal, ordinary, and yet I could feel the shift in the air. She'd changed, David had changed, I had changed, and somehow we'd made it through. At one point, while Melinda was in the kitchen, David leaned over and whispered, "Mom, I don't know what you did, but thank you." I smiled and said, "It's not about what I did, it's about what she let go of." He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. Later, as we sat sipping tea, Melinda said something that made my heart skip. "I've been thinking of volunteering at the shelter, maybe with women who've been through hard things." I nodded slowly. "That sounds like a good place to start." She looked down, fiddled with her cup, then added, "I think it's time I made peace with myself." And for the first time, I saw her. Not the girl who tried to control fate, not the woman driven by greed, but the part of her that was still trying to heal. That night when I got home, I passed by the mirror. I didn't stop. I didn't need to ask it anything, because I finally understood. The strongest magic isn't in rituals or mirrors or ancient books. It's in forgiveness, in boundaries, in choosing not to match pain with pain. It's in reclaiming who you are, even when others try to define you. So no, Melinda never truly understood who I used to be. But now, she knows who I chose to become. And that, my dear, that was the real spell all along.